You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead. I agree with the family. I hope you die in prison as well. You know, if this was a death penalty state, you'd be getting the chair.
She looked directly at the judge, confident, almost smiling like she was about to walk out of that courtroom and grab dinner with friends. Camia Gamet had convinced herself that claiming self-defense would be enough, that her version of events would override the evidence. Her boyfriend was dead, stabbed multiple times during what she called an attack on her. But the judge didn't buy it.
You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed.
Her outbursts, her lack of remorse, her constant interruptions, it all painted a picture of someone who couldn't accept what she'd done. When the sentence came down, life without parole, she screamed about lies and injustice. But across the state, in a different courtroom, another young woman was about to learn the same brutal lesson. She walked in confident, calm even. Her lawyer had filled her head with hope. Probation, maybe community service, definitely going home. Her mother sat in the gallery already planning the drive back together. Then the judge spoke. 20 years.
20 years in state prison.
Moment her world shattered. Two young women, two courtrooms, both convinced they'd walk out free, both devastatingly wrong. One claimed she was defending herself. The other thought her cooperation would save her. What they did to end up there, that's the story you need to hear. Camia Tiffany Gamet stood accused of murdering her boyfriend Marcel Hill in Jackson, Michigan. She claimed self-defense during an argument that ended with Hill stabbed to death. Andrea Cook faced charges for orchestrating armed carjackings through a dating app in Volusia County, Florida, where her boyfriend shot a victim who barely survived. If cases like these keep you thinking about justice, accountability, and the consequences of our choices, hit that like button right now and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. These stories matter. These lessons matter. Now let's delve into the first case. Camia Tiffany Gamet, the woman who claimed self-defense after stabbing her boyfriend to death, but whose story the court didn't believe. What began as a heated argument between Camia Tiffany Gamet and her boyfriend Marcel Hill escalated into something far more violent, something irreversible. The details of what sparked the confrontation may never be fully clear, but what happened next was undeniable. During the argument, Gamet grabbed a knife. She didn't stab Marcel Hill once in a moment of panic. She stabbed him multiple times. The attack was relentless, brutal, and it didn't stop until Hill collapsed. By the time it was over, Marcel Hill was dying from his wounds. There was no coming back from what had been done. Emergency responders arrived, but it was too late. Marcel Hill was pronounced dead from his injuries. The scene told a story of violence that went far beyond a single defensive act. The number of stab wounds, the ferocity of the attack, it all pointed to something more than fear or self-preservation. Camia Gamet was arrested at the scene and charged with first-degree murder. From that moment forward, her freedom was gone. The question now wasn't whether Marcel Hill was dead, it was whether Gamet could convince a jury she had no choice but to kill him. In court, Gamet insisted she was the victim. Her defense strategy was straightforward: self-defense. She claimed that Marcel Hill had been the aggressor, that he was attacking her, and that she feared for her life. In her telling, she wasn't a murderer. She was a woman who did what she had to do to survive. She took the stand and testified that Hill had come at her, that she had no choice, that the stabbing was an act of desperation, not murder. Her version of events painted her as the victim, fighting back against a violent partner. But her demeanor in court raised questions. Even as she spoke, there was something in the way she carried herself that didn't sit right with observers.
The way I was portrayed, mostly everything was lies. There was a little bit of truth, but mostly I was convicted off of lies.
There was a little bit of truth, but mostly I was convicted off of lies. The prosecution saw it differently. They presented evidence that contradicted her self-defense claim. The medical examiner's report detailed the extent of Hill's injuries, the number of stab wounds, their locations, the force behind them. This wasn't a single desperate strike. This was repeated, deliberate violence. The prosecution argued that the evidence showed intent, not fear. It showed rage, not self-preservation. Witnesses were called. Evidence was presented. The jury listened to both sides, examined the facts, and weighed Gamet's testimony against the physical evidence left behind. When they deliberated, they didn't take long to reach a conclusion. The verdict? Guilty of murder. Camia Gamet's self-defense claim had failed. The jury didn't believe her story. They believed the evidence, and now she would face the consequences. Even after the guilty verdict, Gamet refused to accept responsibility. Her behavior in court would only make things worse. Sentencing hearings are typically solemn affairs. The convicted sits quietly, perhaps showing remorse, perhaps offering an apology to the victim's family. Judges expect a level of decorum, even from those who have committed terrible crimes. Camia Gamet had no intention of following that script. Throughout the sentencing hearing, Gamet repeatedly interrupted the judge. She interjected, talked over him, refused to remain silent. Her outbursts weren't expressions of remorse or pleas for mercy. They were defiant, combative. She continued to insist that she had been wronged, that the trial was unfair, that she was the real victim. The judge's patience wore thin. At one point, he issued a stark warning.
Shut your mouth or I'm going to have some duct tape put on it.
But it wasn't just her interruptions that stood out. It was her complete lack of remorse. There was no acknowledgement of what she had done to Marcel Hill, no recognition of the pain his family was enduring. She showed no signs of regret, no sorrow for the life she had taken. To those watching, including the judge, it was clear. Gamet wasn't sorry, she was angry. Angry that she had been caught, angry that she had been convicted, angry that no one believed her story. The judge took note of everything, her behavior, her attitude, her refusal to accept responsibility, and he let it inform what came next. When it was time for the judge to hand down the sentence, he didn't hold back. He looked directly at Gamet and spoke with a bluntness that cut through the courtroom.
You stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed, you stabbed until he was dead.
The repetition was deliberate. Each word landed like a hammer, emphasizing the violence, the intent, the repeated decision to keep going. This wasn't self-defense. This was murder. And the judge wanted Gamet and everyone in that courtroom to understand that. Then he went further. He echoed the sentiments of Marcel Hill's grieving family, people who would never see their loved one again, who would carry the weight of his loss for the rest of their lives.
Dead. I agree with the family. I hope you die in prison as well.
It was an extraordinary statement, one that reflected the severity of the crime and the depth of the harm Gamet had caused. He didn't stop there. He added, almost as a final punctuation to his condemnation,
if this was a death penalty state, you'd be getting the chair.
The sentence was handed down, life in prison without the possibility of parole. There would be no second chance, no parole hearing, no release. Camia Gamet would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Her reaction was predictable. She continued to claim injustice, continued to insist she had been convicted on lies. But the courtroom had heard enough. The verdict was final, the sentence was final. Marcel Hill's family could finally begin to process their grief, knowing that justice had been served. Before we move to the next story, if you believe more people need to understand the difference between real self-defense and murder disguised as self-defense, hit that like button and subscribe. These cases matter. These stories need to be told. Don't miss what happens next. Now, let's turn to a very different case, one that went viral for all the wrong reasons. This is the story of Andrea Cook, the teenager who walked into court expecting to go home, only to have her world shatter in an instant, caught on camera for millions to see. On March 22, 2017, South Daytona, Florida, Andrea Cook, just 18 years old, was scrolling through a dating app called Meet Me. She wasn't looking for a date. She was looking for a victim. Cook matched with Perry Nadita, a 27-year-old from Palm Coast. She knew exactly what to say, exactly what promises to make. Sex, marijuana, whatever he wanted to hear. Nadita believed every word. He was so convinced this was real that he invited a friend along, 17-year-old Emmanuel Purcell, who was planning to sell Cook some weed. Easy money, maybe something more. It all seemed routine. They climbed into Nadita's truck and drove to the location Cook had given them. But Cook wasn't alone. She had never planned to meet them by herself. Her boyfriend, Kendrick Bass, was waiting in the shadows, ski mask pulled down, red hoodie, and a black handgun with a laser sight already aimed. As soon as Nadita and Purcell arrived, Bass made his move. He climbed into the back seat of the truck and jammed the gun directly into Nadita's chest. This was an ambush, planned and executed with cold precision. Purcell didn't freeze. In a split-second decision driven by pure survival instinct, he shoved Bass as hard as he could, trying to knock the gun away, trying to give them a chance to escape. Bass fired. Once, twice. Shots rang out in the confined space of the truck. Purcell collapsed, blood spreading across his stomach. He'd been hit twice. As he lay there, bleeding, barely conscious, Cook and Bass grabbed the keys to the truck and vanished into the night. Emmanuel Purcell was left dying in that truck. When paramedics finally reached him, doctors said it was a miracle he didn't bleed out right there. A few inches in a different direction, a few more minutes without help, and he would have been dead. He survived, but barely, and his life would never be the same.
2 days later, they did it again. Same app, same lies, same violence. You'd think after nearly killing someone, most people would stop. Most people would realize they'd crossed the line they could never come back from. Not Andrea Cook and Kendrick Bass. On March 24, 2017, just 2 days after shooting Emmanuel Purcell, they went back to the Meet Me app. Same strategy, same lies, another victim lured in with promises that would never be kept. Another carjacking, another act of violence. But this time, they left a trail. The victims didn't stay quiet. Perry Nadita and Emmanuel Purcell went straight to the police with detailed descriptions of their attackers. They described Cook. They described Bass. They described the setup. It matched perfectly. Investigators started digging into the Meet Me app, tracing the profile that had been used to lure both sets of victims. It didn't take long before they traced it directly back to Andrea Cook. And here's the part that made it even easier for police. Cook worked at the restaurant where the first meeting was supposed to go down. She had orchestrated an armed robbery at her own workplace. She wasn't exactly a criminal mastermind. The evidence was piling up. The victims could identify her, the app profile led straight to her, her connection to the location was undeniable. It was only a matter of time before the walls closed in.
On April 27, 2017, Andrea Cook was arrested and charged in connection with the armed carjackings. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Prosecutors looked at what they had, witness testimony, the app messages, the pattern of attacks, and they made her an offer. Testify against Kendrick Bass, the guy who actually pulled the trigger, and things might go easier for you. It was a straightforward deal. Bass was the shooter. He was the one who fired the gun into Emmanuel Purcell's stomach. If Cook cooperated fully, if she helped put him away, the prosecution would consider that cooperation when it came time for her sentencing. It was her best shot at a lighter sentence, maybe her only shot. Cook agreed. She made a court-ordered, controlled call to Bass, exactly the way prosecutors told her to. Everything was going according to plan. She was cooperating. She was following the rules. She had a chance. But then Cook made a decision that would change everything. She contacted Bass again, outside the court's permission. She violated the terms of the deal. Her cooperation, which had been her one advantage, completely fell apart. Prosecutors were furious. She'd just thrown away the one thing that could have helped her. The deal was off. Whatever goodwill she might have earned was gone. But her lawyer, public defender Frank Scott, told her she'd be fine anyway. "Don't worry," he said. "You're young. You didn't pull the trigger. You cooperated, mostly. You'll probably just get probation." Cook held on to every word like it was a promise. When Andrea Cook walked into the courtroom on June 27, 2017 to enter a no-contest plea, she wasn't scared. She wasn't anxious. She was calm, confident even. Her public defender, Frank Scott, had been filling her head with reassurance for weeks.
You'll probably get probation, he told her. You're young, you have no violent priors, and you cooperated, mostly. Cook believed him. She held on to those words like they were a guarantee. Her mother believed it too. She sat in the courtroom that day thinking the nightmare was finally over, thinking she'd be taking her daughter home, thinking they could put this behind them and move forward. Cook wasn't fidgeting. She wasn't crying. She stood before the judge, nodding along as he went through the charges, the plea agreement, the facts of the case. In her mind, this was just a formality. The judge would lecture her, maybe give her probation or community service, and she'd walk out those doors a free woman. Her mother watched from just a few feet away, waiting for the moment she could finally hug her daughter again. But then, something shifted. The judge's tone started to change. His words got heavier, slower, more deliberate. Cook's face began to change too. The confidence that had carried her through the hearing started to drain away. Her mother leaned forward slightly, confused. Something wasn't right. The air in that courtroom felt different now, like everyone suddenly realized this wasn't going the way Cook thought it would. The judge looked directly at her. He took a breath, and then he said it. Miss Cook, you're before the court for sentencing. Couple of things going in your favor. One, you didn't hold the firearm during these episodes. The second is that the victim luckily survived. Cook was still listening, still nodding. Those words sounded hopeful. The judge was acknowledging she hadn't held the gun. He was acknowledging Purcell had survived. Maybe her lawyer was right, after all. That being said, this was intentional. It was an orchestrated ambush, and you are a main part of that. The judge's voice was firm now, unyielding. And for that, I'm going to go ahead and adjudicate you guilty of all 3 charges. I sentence you to 20 years in state prison.
Shooting.
Keeps you guilty of all 3 charges, sentence you to 20 years in state prison.
It was pure, raw devastation. Cook's scream was so visceral, so filled with anguish that it seemed to freeze everyone in place. And then her mother's wail began. It was so loud, so raw, so filled with grief that the judge actually had to pause. He had to stop speaking. He had to wait because no one could hear him over the sound of a mother's heart breaking in real time. Cook couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. Her daughter wasn't coming home. Not today, not for 20 years. The judge had to repeat the sentence because no one had heard it the first time over the cries echoing through the courtroom. Concurrent as to the first attack, he clarified. The crying you hear is coming from Cook's mother. The sentence much more severe than they expected. The video of that moment went viral, millions of views. People watched it over and over, frame by frame, seeing the exact second hope died in real time. You can see it on Cook's face, the moment she realizes her lawyer was wrong, the moment she understands what just happened, the moment her entire world collapses. Even the judge would later admit it. There's no doubt in my mind Miss Cook believed she was going home. After that devastating sentencing hearing, after the video went viral and millions watched Andrea Cook's world shatter, 2 new attorneys stepped forward to take her case pro bono. Their names were Stephen Robinson and Kelvin Daniels. They reviewed the case, spoke with Cook, examined the communications between her and her public defender, Frank Scott, and came to a conclusion. Something had gone wrong. Cook's plea hadn't been fully informed. She hadn't understood what she was walking into. They filed a motion claiming manifest injustice. Their argument was simple and direct. Frank Scott had misled her. He had promised probation. He had never properly explained the real risks she was facing. He had let her walk into that courtroom on June 27th, genuinely believing she was going home. A hearing was scheduled for August 15, 2017. This time, the focus wouldn't be on what Cook had done, it would be on what her lawyer had told her and whether she had truly understood the consequences of her plea. On August 15, 2017, Andrea Cook testified before Judge Karen Foxman. She spoke about her conversations with Frank Scott, about what he had told her, about how confident she had felt walking into that courtroom. There was no doubt in my mind I thought I was going home, Cook testified. And why was there no doubt in your mind, she was asked. 'Cause he promised me I was going home. She described how Scott had reassured her repeatedly. He was telling me that I can go home or pretrial release so I can finish school. When asked about her interactions with Scott, she was clear. When you talked to Mr. Scott, was he nice to you? Yes, sir. Okay. Was he professional? Yes, sir. Did you believe the things that he said to you? Yes, sir. Cook painted a picture of a young woman who had trusted her lawyer completely, who had believed every reassurance he gave her, and who had walked into court with genuine confidence that she would be going home. Then it was Frank Scott's turn to testify. Scott admitted he had been optimistic about Cook's chances. He acknowledged telling her there was a good chance she'd avoid prison time, but he denied making any guarantees. I did tell her there was a good chance she would be going home on the 27th, but I never promised or guaranteed that she would, Scott testified. He explained his reasoning. I was very optimistic that Judge Foxman was going to sentence her as a youthful offender and/or give her community control or probation. His position was clear. He had been hopeful, yes, but he hadn't made any specific promises. He had simply expressed his professional opinion about what he thought might happen. Judge Karen Foxman listened to both sides carefully. She weighed Cook's testimony against Scott's. She considered the circumstances, the communications, and most importantly, Cook's state of mind when she entered her plea. After hearing testimony from both Andrea Cook and Frank Scott, Judge Karen Foxman made her ruling, and it was one that would give Cook a second chance. There's no doubt in my mind that Miss Cook believed she was going home, Judge Foxman stated. The judge acknowledged that there had been confusion, serious confusion, about what Cook was facing when she entered her plea. Whether it was miscommunication, over-optimism, or something else, the result was the same. Cook had not fully understood the risks. If nothing else but confusion as to what would happen, the judge continued, the manifest injustice that does exist here is not the sentence itself. It's the fact that you entered a plea, in my opinion, that was not free, knowing, and voluntarily entered, despite a thorough colloquy in the plea form. It was a significant admission. The judge wasn't saying the 20-year sentence was unjust for what Cook had done. She was saying that Cook's plea had been flawed from the start because Cook genuinely didn't understand what she was agreeing to. So the motion requested from you, Miss Cook, to withdraw your plea is granted. The 20-year sentence was vacated. Cook would be allowed to withdraw her plea and start over. She would have another chance to understand exactly what she was facing and to make an informed decision about how to proceed. It was an extraordinary outcome, one that happens rarely in the justice system, but it was also a reminder. For a plea to be valid, the defendant must truly understand what they're agreeing to. And in this case, Cook clearly didn't. On April 9, 2018, Andrea Cook stood before the court again. This time, there was no confusion, no misunderstanding, no false hope. She entered a new plea deal, and this time, she knew exactly what she was facing. Prosecutors acknowledged her partial cooperation in the case, the fact that she had initially tried to help them build a case against Kendrick Bass, even if she later violated the terms. They also considered her age, the fact that she hadn't been the one to pull the trigger, and the circumstances of her first sentencing. Her new sentence, 11 years in prison, followed by 20 years of probation running concurrently. It was still a long sentence. She would be in her late 20s when she was released, but it was significantly less than the original 20 years. Cook's scheduled release date was set for January 2028. For comparison, Kendrick Bass, the one who actually pulled the trigger, who fired 2 shots into Emmanuel Purcell's stomach, was sentenced to 20 years in prison. His release date is December 2037. Cook had received a second chance, both legally and in terms of her sentence. She would serve her time knowing exactly what she had done and exactly what the consequences were. There would be no more surprises, no more viral courtroom breakdowns, just the long, slow passage of time behind bars.